For 9 series, the show's own title gave away the secret Colin Dexter guarded for 30 years. The first name, Morse, refused to speak aloud. And the entire series only exists because of a loophole. The man who created Morse had made it known that no other actor could ever replace John Thaw, so television found a way to obey him and defy him at once.
Are you prepared to indicate to the court the present state of your inquiries? Not yet, sir.
Fact 1. The title spoils the mystery. For decades, it was one of the best-kept secrets in crime fiction. Inspector Morse had no first name, or rather, he had one, and refused to use it. Across novel after novel and episode after episode, he deflected the question with the same weary answer: "Just call me Morse." Colin Dexter guarded the secret for 30 years and only surrendered it near the very end. In Death Is Now My Neighbor, published in 1996, the truth finally emerged. Morse's first name is Endeavour, the gift of a Quaker mother and a father who idolized Captain Cook, naming his son after the great explorer's ship. It explained everything about the man's silence. Endeavour is not a name a boy carries lightly through an English school, and Morse treated it as a wound, a private embarrassment. He spent a lifetime concealing from colleagues, who assumed the initial E stood for something ordinary, which makes the prequel's title a quiet act of mischief. The word Morse spent 30 years hiding is written across every episode, every trailer, every listing the answer to Dexter's longest-running mystery, hiding in plain sight as the name of the show. New viewers watch without realizing they have already been handed the secret. Longtime fans see it immediately. The series about young Morse is named after the one thing old Morse would never say out loud. Dexter, characteristically, had planted clues all along. In the novels, Morse's initial appears long before the reveal, and sharp-eyed readers had spent years guessing at everything from Edward to Ernest. Nobody guessed the truth, because the truth was not a name so much as a sentence passed on a boy by his parents' enthusiasms.
No, you're all right, miss, thank you.
That could have been nasty.
Fact 2. The series dodged a vow. After John Thaw died in 2002, one thing seemed settled forever: there would be no new Morse. Colin Dexter made it known that he wanted no other actor to take over the role that Thaw had made his own. The character and the performance had fused, and recasting was unthinkable. Television honored that and then found the loophole. Lewis carried the world forward through the sidekick. And a decade after Thaw's death came the more audacious idea. Not a replacement Morse, but a preceding one. A young detective constable in the 1960s, decades before Thaw's version ever appeared on screen. The distinction mattered enormously. Shaun Evans was never asked to step into Thaw's shoes. He was asked to walk toward them. Nobody was replacing the definitive Morse. The new series was building the man who would one day become him. And crucially, it happened with the creator's blessing. Dexter was closely involved with the prequel until his death, consulted on the character's past, and approved of the direction, satisfied, by all accounts, that the loophole honored the spirit of his vow rather than cheating it. It remains one of television's most elegant solutions to an impossible problem: how to continue a story whose leading man could never be replaced. The answer was to tell the part of the story he had not yet entered.
If I'm going to go on helping you with your inquiries, I can't keep calling you Inspector
Morse.
Fact 3. Thursday was never real. Ask devoted fans of the original Inspector Morse about Fred Thursday, and you will get a blank look. And that blank look is one of the most fascinating things about Endeavour. The gruff, decent, trilby-wearing mentor at the heart of the prequel does not exist anywhere in Colin Dexter's world. Thursday was invented for the series a wholly new character, created to give young Morse what the old Morse conspicuously never mentioned having: a teacher, a father figure, a man who shaped him. Roger Allam's performance made him so essential that many viewers assume he must have been in the books all along. He never was. And that absence became the engine of the entire show. Because if Thursday mattered this much to young Morse, one question hangs over every series: why does the older Morse never speak of him? Not once, in 33 films, does Thaw's Morse mention the man who made him. The series turned that silence into a slow-burning mystery of its own. Something someday, must separate these two men so completely that Morse will spend the rest of his life not saying the name. Every warm moment between them carries the shadow of it. It is a remarkable piece of storytelling engineering, a beloved character built entirely inside a gap in the canon, and a friendship the audience knows from the very first episode is somehow doomed to be erased. Alum himself became inseparable from the show's identity, the measured voice, the sandwiches wrapped by Wynne, the sudden capacity for violence when the case demanded it. Endeavour was sold as the story of young Morse, but for millions of viewers, it quietly became a two-hander. The making of one great detective and the slow weathering of another. Fact 4. Every ending was fixed. Most dramas can surprise you with where their characters end up. A prequel cannot, and Endeavour turned that limitation into its deepest source of power. For anyone who knew the original series, the fates of these people were already carved in stone. Young Jim Strange, the amiable uniformed constable, will rise and rise because in Inspector Morse, he is Chief Superintendent Strange, Morse's superior, outranking the brilliant man he once looked up to. Every step of his ascent in Endeavour lands with that knowledge attached. Young Max de Brin, the fastidious pathologist, will still be examining bodies decades later he appears in the early Morse films, one of the few faces the two eras genuinely share. And Morse himself will never marry, which means every romance the prequel gives him, above all the long ache of Joan Thursday, is doomed before it begins. The audience watches it all like a Greek tragedy. Hope is permitted, outcomes are not. When young Morse reaches for happiness, long-time viewers already know his hand closes on nothing because they have met the solitary man at the other end of the timeline. It is the strangest contract a detective drama ever made with its audience. The mysteries of the week could be solved, but the largest mystery ran backwards, not what will happen to these people, but how, exactly, it will be allowed to hurt. The fixed endings even shaped how the show could grieve. Characters the audience adored could not simply be carried forward into the original series canon, had no room for them. So the prequel's farewells carried unusual weight. When Endeavour said goodbye to someone, the goodbye was absolute, enforced not by a writer's whim, but by 33 films of established history. Fact 5. The star became the director. The most Oxford of all television detectives, the crossword mind, the opera, the immaculate vowels, was built by an actor from the other end of England entirely. Shaun Evans was born and raised in Liverpool, about as far from the quads and cloisters as English accents travel. The transformation was total. Evans constructed young Morse's clipped precision from scratch, a working-class actor building an ivory tower intellect, and doing it so completely that millions of viewers assume the man himself must have wandered out of a senior common room. Then, as the series matured, Evans quietly took on a second job, directing it. Across the later series, he stepped behind the camera for multiple episodes, directing himself as Morse, shaping the look and rhythm of the show he fronted. It is rarer than it sounds. Plenty of stars direct. Very few direct the prestige drama resting on their own shoulders, playing its most scrutinized character under the shadow of the most beloved performance in the genre's history. By the end, Evans' fingerprints were on Endeavour twice over in front of the lens, as the young Morse he built from nothing, and behind it, as one of the people deciding exactly how this world would look as it moved toward its ending. If you're enjoying this, it would mean a lot if you subscribed. It helps us keep making videos like this one. Just hit that button and you'll never miss a new one. Fact 6. History closed the station. One of the biggest upheavals in the series was not invented by any screenwriter. It happened in the real world. In 1968, an Endeavour built whole stretches of its story on top of it. That year, Oxford City Police, the force that had policed the city in its own right for well over a century, ceased to exist. It was swallowed into the newly created Thames Valley Force, part of a nationwide wave of mergers that erased dozens of proud old constabularies at a stroke. The series folded the upheaval directly into its world. The uncertainty, the reorganizations, the new hierarchies and unfamiliar masters, the sense of an old order being dismantled around men who had given their lives to it. For characters like Bright and Thursday, the merger was an earthquake. It gave the drama something money cannot fake, the texture of real institutional history. Viewers who lived through the era recognized it instantly, and the original Inspector Morse, set decades later, takes place entirely inside the Thames Valley world, whose painful birth the prequel dramatized. It is a detail that rewards the devoted. The bridge between the two shows is not just a character growing older, but a real historical event, the death of one police force and the birth of another, playing out around a young detective who would spend the rest of his fictional life inside it. Fact 7. Oxford's 40-year performance. When Endeavour ended, it closed more than a series. It completed one of the longest continuous performances any city has ever given on television. Oxford has now played itself across 3 interlocking dramas, Inspector Morse, Lewis, and Endeavour, in a run stretching from 1987 to 2023. Between them, the 3 series produced more than 100 feature-length films, a single fictional universe, anchored to one real city, sustained across 4 decades with audiences following from one show to the next. No other British city has anything like it. London is everyone's backdrop and no one's character. Oxford, by contrast, became a genuine co-star. The colleges, the libraries, the river, and the honey-coloured stone framed with the same care as the actors, era after era. The prequel deepened the performance by turning back the clock, dressing the same streets in 60s cars and fashions, showing the familiar city as a younger version of itself, exactly as it did with its detective. And the partnership rewrote the city's real life. Morse tourism has flowed through Oxford for decades, visitors tracing pubs, colleges and film locations across all 3 shows, a 40-year embrace between a city and a fictional universe that shows no sign of ending. The 3 shows even handed characters across the decades like batons. Lewis grew from Morse's sergeant into his own series. Endeavour supplied the early versions of faces the original made famous. One city, one continuity, 3 generations of television, all of it resting on the same streets. Fact 8. It explains his sadness. Strip away the mysteries, and Endeavour had one great project running underneath all 9 series, explaining John Thaw's Morse. Where did the melancholy come from, the solitude, the thwartedness, the sense of a life that had somehow gone wrong early? The prequel's answer was patient and quietly devastating. It showed the losses, one by one, the loves that slipped away or were let go, the friendships that could not survive. The career that stalled while lesser men rose past him, the brilliant detective repeatedly denied the advancement his gifts deserved. Each series subtracted a little more hope. Young Morse begins the show earnest, open, capable of joy, and the story's real business was showing, step by step, how that man curdles into the magnificent, wounded loner of the original series. It reframes the older show completely. Watch Thaw's Morse after Endeavour, and the character reads differently. The sharpness now has sources, the solitude has a history, the sadness has names attached to it. Few prequels have ever taken the assignment so seriously. Endeavour was never really about solving murders in the 60s. It was a 9-series answer to a question fans had asked since 1987. What happened to this man? Fact 9. The 60s died on screen. The pilot opens in 1965, and one of the series' quietest achievements is what happened to the world around its detective over the 9 series that followed. Endeavour did not just occupy the 60s, it buried them. Year by year, the show walked its era forward through the optimism of the mid-60s, the upheavals at the decade's end, and on into the greyer, harder territory of the early 70s. The cars change, the music changes, the light itself seems to change. The transformation was the point. The England of the pilot, deferential, orderly, sure of itself, dissolves in front of the audience, replaced by something more cynical and more dangerous. The institutions young Morse joined are not the ones he ends up serving. The series used its period the way the best historical drama does, not as wallpaper but as weather a changing climate pressing on every character. Thursday's generation, formed by the war, watches its world evaporate. Morse's generation inherits the uncertainty. By the final series, set in the early 70s, the sunny Oxford of the opening films feels like a memory which is exactly how the show wanted it. The 60s end on screen the way they ended in life, gradually and then unmistakably. Fact 10. They never closed the gap. Endeavour could have run on. The audience was loyal, the format was proven, and the timeline had years of road left before it reached the original series. Instead, in 2023, the show did something increasingly rare in television. It chose its own ending. The 9th series was announced in advance as the last. The final film carried the title Exeunt, the old stage direction, Latin for "they leave," and the makers closed the story deliberately on their own terms while it was still loved, and they left the gap. The series ended with years still standing between young Morse's story and the 1987 beginning of Thaw's, a stretch of the character's life that will now, presumably, never be filmed. The restraint was the point. Driving the timeline all the way to the join would have meant trespassing on Thaw's territory, an older Evans shading into an impression of a performance the creator had declared untouchable. Stopping short kept the vow intact to the very end. So the two Morses never meet, and the space between them stays where it belongs in the audience's imagination. Endeavour spent 9 series walking toward John Thaw, and its final act of devotion was refusing to arrive. It also gave the finale a poignancy no ordinary ending could match. Most series finales close a door. This one left it ajar forever. Somewhere beyond the final scene, the audience knows exactly what waits a red Jaguar, a crossword, the Times folded on the passenger seat, and the show trusted its viewers to make that journey themselves.